And after a bit of a break, the pharmacy is now reopened. Welcome back to Pharmaceutical Soccer. Clay Trainum joined by Valera Shabilla. Unfortunately, although we are a pharmacy, sometimes pharmacists get sick, and Steven is not with us this week. We assume he'll be back next week, but we think he's just avoiding all soccer talk until there's something fun to talk about with Nashville SC. He's a little bit worn out on that front. But
I
once
thought he
again,
was
play with
I
Valera.
thought he was faking it, but then I remembered he missed Sunday night FIFA Pro Clubs last night. So uh, maybe he's not faking it. I don't know, or he's faking it for both. Who knows?
Yeah. So Steven just giving up all soccer uh activities in his life as he goes through his final stage of grieving with a new a new coach for Nashville SC for the first time that we've ever said that. There is actually a new manager in charge for Nashville SC, and that's what most of today's show is going to be about. Obviously, there was no games over the weekend, but BJ Callaghan is now officially in charge for NSC, having taken over last Monday. There were some events last week. Valera got to meet with him at the press conference. There was a fan event. I have thoughts about that. But generally speaking, this is now going right back into the meat and potatoes of Nashville SC. So we have a game coming up on Wednesday. Nashville SC will be taking on Mazatlan in the League's Cup, the start of the League's Cup. It's the League's Cup fever. Got to catch it. And we're going to be talking mostly about BJ Callaghan and Patrick Yazbek, whose signing was, of course, broken here on Pharma Soccer a few weeks ago as Steven had a very fortuitous Google search.
He stumbled upon it. And
Yeah.
it came to him, but yeah, I mean it's exciting times, man. I mean it's one of those things where I think you can see from the event they put together that Nashville SC is trying to make this, pretty big news. And honestly, they don't have to try. It is already big news. I mean, I think I've said it on this show before, but the biggest sort of the most popular news, not the biggest, let's say, the most popular news from Nashville SC camp has been parting ways with Gary Smith and hiring BJ Callaghan. Even the Leagues Cup final last year, I don't remember it being this popular. And I'm talking about, like local media coverage, right? Or just folks talking about it. When they parted ways with Gary Smith, it was a very big deal, and it kind of reached levels of engagement that just hadn't been reached by Nashville SC before, which is interesting, right? But that's kind of the nature of the sport. But before we get into all the BJ Callahan stuff and all the sort of juicy stuff, I do want to. Well, do you want to do your weekend first? What did you do this weekend?
Oh, flipping the script. That was what I was getting to once you finished talking. But yeah, my weekend was all right. We went down to McMinnville with my wife's family, had dinner down there and hung out a bit. Also, I will say this, I didn't get to say that I did this last week because we didn't have a show, but last weekend I went to go see Cirque du Soleil, as I call it, at
Mm-hmm.
at TPAC and had fun with that. So it's been a few weeks of stuff, and then yesterday we did some board games, living it up, crazy life. So it's been a good few weeks, a good break from sort of the sadness of watching NSC the last like month and a half.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I felt good that there wasn't an Nashville SC game this weekend. I watched very little of the Leagues Cup. Um, there were games going on starting Friday, but yeah, I caught a few of them, caught some highlights here and there, but I was kind of busy with other stuff and watched a good bit of the Olympics early in the day. That's been kind of a fun one for
I
me.
mean, shout it out. Big win for Iraq at the start, right?
Yes, yes, we won the first one. Pretty good stuff. We beat Ukraine 2-1, but then lost to Argentina 3-1. No shame in losing to Argentina. That's just life. We are Iraq is participating in men's soccer. We have one track and field guy who has no events listed under his name, so I don't even know what he's doing there. We have one weight weightlifter. Is that a real thing?
Yes.
And then we have one one more sport, maybe swimming. But yeah, slim pickings for Iraq in the Olympics. But I'm excited to see that. But I'm just it's a fun one. Every 4 years you get to see, and the last Olympics just didn't feel real. So I'm sorry to the people who won. I'm sure it felt real to them, but this feels a lot more Olympics like.
I don't get too like star spangled awesome about most things, as Blair knows. But I will say, watching the Olympic ceremony, it's always funny to me. It's like, you know, 100 athletes, 30 athletes, three
Yeah.
athletes, 100 athletes, 200 athletes. And then the US group was at the very end of it, or the second to last one was the US group because they're hosting a future Olympics in LA. And it was like almost 600.
Yeah.
It was like guys splitting boats, splitting boats, splitting boats, small boats, medium sized boats, and then one big boat that's all US. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's a little different.
Yeah, it's one of it's obviously the biggest participants of any other country, but even when you compare it to like the other two, that they're like 200 athletes over China, which I think is the second one.
Yeah,
So
France
but,
France has a lot because the host country, I think they try
right,
and compete in everything. So the France boat was last, and it was large, but it was still a good bit off. Yeah,
yeah. And it shows in the medals and all that, but it's a fun time. I've been learning about other sports. Um, some I like, some I don't like. Really got into archery this morning, so so that was fun.
I was I was bizarrely into rugby sevens for about 3 hours. It's
Mm.
one of the so for me, obviously, I worked in sports for a long time, and mostly what we phrase in college sports as Olympic sports, which essentially is a kind way of saying these are sports that don't produce revenue for the school. And so like I always love the Olympics. Like one of the cool things for me in the Olympics is that you can see a lot of college athletes that you watch at a local school that are playing in the Olympics. So like MTSU, I think has three. I was watching something with Coco Gauff where she was being given the flag to be the flag bearer for the U.S. And she was given that by Chris Eubanks, a tennis player from the U.S., who I watched play at Georgia Tech quite a few times. So it's like kind of cool, like if you work in Olympic sports, seeing these guys pop up for different countries, all around the globe. So that's one of my favorite parts, but obviously that's a pretty narrow thing. But anyway, this is not an Olympics podcast, unfortunately,
It
or
will be later
fortunately,
on
I
too.
guess.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is a Nashville SC podcast. In the League's Cup, quite a controversial tournament in the American soccer sphere. The League's Cup is starting this week for Nashville on Wednesday, and there was a poll put out this morning by Valair about excitement levels. Where do we think NSC is going to end up?
I think I think I'm a little surprised by the answers. So essentially, I just asked people where do you think Nashville SC, how far Nashville SC will get, and because I only get four options on Twitter, I combined round of 32 and round of 16, had the quarterfinals on their own, group stage first, and then semifinal, final combined. So maybe that's a little confusing, but I'm surprised about 37% of people said group stage. Um, with New England beating Mazatlan 1-0, that means Nashville SC pretty much just has to like tie two games to get in. Even tie one game and win the penalty shootout, and they're in. It's very, very I think it'll be harder for Nashville SC to not make it out of this group than to make it out of this group. Then it goes into most people put 46% of people put round of 32 or round of 16, which is where I land. That's where I see Nashville SC going. 5% or so said quarterfinal, then 10% said semis or final. I think quarterfinals, semifinal, a little optimistic for my liking. I think when I look at this Nashville SC team, I can see them going into the next round. Like I said, the group stages, honestly, those two games, Nashville SC should make it out of that. I don't see a world where they don't, and that's a positive by any means. I know some folks are talking about like spending more time with BJ and all that, but no, if you lose to Mazatlan, New England Revolution, and don't make it out of this, it's a disappointment, and it's not something you want to do It will not build momentum into whatever comes next. However, if you win one of those games, go into the round of 16 or even round of 32, and maybe lose there, you still got a win or two under your belt. You're kind of building something, and you'll play 3 games under BJ Callaghan until MLS comes back. You have more to build upon, which is where I think Nashville should at least aim to be.
Yeah, I obviously we all know what happened post Leagues Cup last year. It was a downslide, but I think what gets lost in the fold a little bit is that Nashville wasn't particularly good in the group stage in the Leagues Cup last year. They lost to Toluca, gave up a bunch of goals, and then they had a nitty gritty type win over Colorado that wasn't exactly impressive. And then, you get the shock win at Cincy on penalties, and that's what really gets the ball rolling for what was a great cup run for NSC. And NSC wasn't in particularly good form going into the Leagues Cup. They kind of were a continuation of where they were, and then they kind of crawled out of it and they lost all that momentum. In this case, because of what's on the line and because of what's going on in the MLS regular season, I think any sort of momentum gained in Leagues Cup would transfer over because you've got a situation where you're not safely in the playoffs after Leagues Cup. You're still playing for something. Last year, Leagues Cup ends, you have the downer on losing the final that in retrospect feels like the capping of the sort of we'll get to the Nashville 1.0 2.0 thing, but that losing in the Leagues Cup final feels like the capper on Nashville 1.0. Like that's what that feels like in retrospect. And so everything was kind of a downslide back from that high. Here, anything that you get in the Leagues Cup, you're going right back into the season with a new coach, with something to play for immediately. And I feel like that will translate differently with this team than where it was team safely in the playoffs coming out of the Leagues Cup and is just kind of holding on down the stretch. I don't know if
Yeah,
I don't know if that's right feeling, but that's the way it seems to me.
no, it definitely makes sense, and especially it's just a different situation than last year when you got a brand new coach coming into it, and even new players, at least one player, right? So I think it's going to be different this year than last year. But I was just shocked that I know Nashville SC are not good right now. I understand that, but 35% out of 120 people or so saying that Nashville will not make it out of the group stage. I think just shows you a little bit where the fan base is at, maybe. But also I just think that's I don't want to say easy. Nothing is easy, but making it out of this group specifically should be very, very doable for Nashville.
Yeah, and we're gonna get way more into BJ Callahan and where Nashville SC is going in the next segment. But before we do that, we got a couple shout outs to give. First off, I want to shout out Grayson, who I saw over at the event, actually, at the BJ Callahan event, said he listens every week. I very much appreciate that. We always appreciate anyone who tells us that they listen to us. It makes it, we don't make any money on this. So like it's one of those things where it makes us feel good. It feels like we're not talking into the void every week. Also in that realm of things, we have avenues for you guys to help us, to help keep the show running, to help us produce these shows every single week, as we have longer than basically anyone in the NSC, atmosphere when it comes to producing content. And that is through our Patreon. Become a what we call it, patient plus. Become
Patient
a
plus.
patient plus of Pharma Soccer. Help us keep the lights on. It's $5 a month. That $5 a month goes a long way over the course of keeping our website online, keeping our subscriptions going, keeping the metaphorical lights on, as we say every week. So please check us out on Patreon and join us if you feel so compelled. We would appreciate it greatly, and we will give you a shout out on the show if you do.
Yeah, also you do get the shows a little earlier than everybody else. And some other cool benefits like when we do events or anything like that. So there are some benefits to it, but most importantly, you'll be helping us. Also, after you join the Patreon or as you're joining the Patreon, you can also give us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify if that's how you listen to podcasts. It's just if you do it on Apple and you give us 5 stars, we will read that review here on this show. So make sure to do that. Yeah, that's it for that. Just make sure to do it because you
Yeah,
help us out. We like
it's
that.
free to leave a review, so please leave a review.
5-star review, that is.
5 star. If you leave anything less than a 5 star review, we will feel personally
We will
insulted.
quit. We will
Yeah,
quit this show.
no more
I
show.
will.
No more show. Uh, and then last but not least, I do want to shout this out. I've had a lot of health things going on in my family. As many of you who listen to this know, many people who listen to us also listen to Club and Country. And then so they know that Wes Bowling has had a significant number of things going on in his family, some very tough, very, very tough things to navigate. If you feel so compelled to help him out, we would greatly appreciate it. Please go to his Twitter, which is just Wes Bowling. There's a link there to donate to his GoFundMe. I have been overwhelmed by the comments and cash that have come on to support my family over the last few months through GoFundMe, and it looks like Wes is off to a good start over there. And they're going to need a lot more help in the coming months and years, probably with what they're battling. So shout out to Wes. We're thinking of you, and hopefully some of you can go help him out as well.
Yeah, Wes is a great friend of mine and Clay's, and as well as just a good voice to have in the Nashville SC soccer scene. But overall, just a great person. And his wife and kid are also, just on this journey with him, obviously. So yeah, help out when you can. But also say hi to us when you see him.
All right, and we will turn to significantly less important things, but important in the soccer world. BJ Callaghan, Patrick Yazbek, and some more news with Nashville SC as we are back in, soccer news territory after a couple of weeks. You're listening to Pharma Soccer. And welcome back to Pharmaceutical Soccer. Clay Trainum once again with Valer Shavilla. Steven is sick in Loudon. That's what we're going with, and that's what we're sticking with. And we are going to talk about BJ Callaghan. BJ, of course, the former assistant for the U.S. national team, a guy who worked with Philadelphia for many years, and a guy who comes from the college soccer ranks, which is pretty fun for me as someone who worked in college soccer for a while. So very, very fun for that on that end for me. But he had his announcement event last week. There was a press conference. Valer was at the press conference. There was a team event. I don't know if it's necessarily meet the coach if no one meets the coach, but they called it a meet the coach event for season ticket holders. I know they did a separate one for club ticket holders, and kind of getting his entry into life in Nashville last week, beginning with his first day on the job last Monday and now continuing into his first game week this week.
Yeah, so it was interesting the way they did it. They haven't done this before, but we had almost a one-on-one sort of with BJ in different stations for different journalists and TV or whatever. So we got to talk to him first in a mixed zone sort of thing. Then he went and did the fan event, which was streamed to us, the media folks. Then he came and did the official sort of press conference. But I think for me, the biggest thing is that we also got the chance to ask questions to Ian Ayre and Mike Jacobs during that first part. So that to me was interesting because I've been on the beat for Nashville SC a year and a half now, maybe. And this is the first time I've ever gotten the opportunity to talk to Ian Ayre in a media capacity. So it's interesting. We don't hear from the CEO a whole lot. He's more behind the scenes type of guy. But he's at every game. I mean, I see him every game, but you don't have that opportunity for a media sort of thing. So that was interesting. And then the other thing that really caught my eye is John Ingram speaking at the beginning of the press conference. He was the first one to open the notes, and the first thing to come out of his mouth was thanking Gary Smith for his service to the club. And that caught me off guard, honestly, because when you have these events, you are only looking forward. You're only looking to the shiny new toy, right? But you're not really thinking of what happened before. So it was interesting to see that, and I mean, I applauded. Gary Smith, we've talked about on this show. He's given Nashville a lot, and for him to get those props. Same thing with Ian Ayre, actually. We were asking him different questions, and he brought up Gary Smith as well. So it's something that clearly the club didn't want that to end the way it did, but they also understand that it's time to move on.
Well, he's ultimately Gary's a foundational piece of the club's existence. And I also think that part of this is John Ingram is not someone who comes from a sports ownership background. This is the first pro
Mhm.
sports team he's owned, and he's going to carry it out in the way that he thinks best sometimes. And I do think that there will be a time, I don't know that it'll necessarily be next year, but there will be a time when they bring Gary Smith back and they give a chance for the NSC crowd to send him off and leave him with a good memory of NSC. I'm sure he has plenty. He's been very gracious with people in the time that he's left. But when they're at the time in the future, when there is some sort of ring of honor, whatever they would call it, they can't call it a ring of fire because that's Chicago's, even though it would fit perfect. But then whenever there's some sort of Hall of Fame or Ring of Honor, however they would do it with NSC, I think it's fairly clear that Gary Smith would be in the first group of people to go in that. And so making sure that everyone's kind of gracious and understands, this is just part of the business is a good thing. And I think that, the longer he's been gone, the better his reputation has gotten among fans because that sort of absence makes the heart grow fonder sort of thing. I think we've really seen that with Gary because everyone kind of recognizes that he did a good job. Now, moving forward, the question will be whether BJ Callaghan can do the same sort of job and build on that and create this Nashville 2.0 that was referenced, at the press conference. And I think that that's an open question. I think that there's reasons to be optimistic. And obviously, it seems like there's a top down uh, emphasis on youth development going on at NSC in the last, couple of months. One of the downsides of youth development is that sometimes they make mistakes and sometimes it doesn't work out and things like that. And I think we've seen some examples of that over the last couple of months. But this is why you go get someone from Philadelphia, a team that's managed to have relatively modest resources and developed a competitive team from its extensive academy, uh, and developmental, pathways to the first team. And I mean, that's what you're going for.
Yeah, I think for BJ it's a it's a it's a fresh start, right? It's something that I was a little surprised on how unified the communications were from Nashville SC. Everybody was saying the same thing, even though we talked to or we heard four different people talk. I think there was a clear plan going into it that, hey, we are going to hit these points, which are thank you, Gary Smith. We're going into Nashville SC 2.0. That means we're going to focus on youth and we're going to get better that way. That was everybody was kind of on the same page, which is, you would think that's how things are. But after 6 or 7 years of Gary Smith, it we just didn't hear from the other folks, right? We didn't know if they were on the same page. It was really up in the air where things are. And now that they brought their guy in, it seems like they are more so on the same page. And it was interesting to me hearing John Ingram talk about youth movement. And he said, we're still going to be a player in the world market, but we are going to focus on the youth because that's how you win in MLS, which is interesting thought to even have. But, to me, like if you hear Ian Air even talk about it, or obviously Mike Jacobs, it makes sense. But seeing Ingram kind of involved in that overall strategy overall long-term strategy was interesting. And then I think um, when you look at how Nashville has handled the youth teams recently, there's a clear difference and a clear shift. Now, before that, I think a lot of it was also out of their hands. Now, Gary Smith was not the most, youthful coach, right? But also a lot of it had to do with them not having an academy up and running, not having a second team up and running until recently, right? So it's not just the coaching staff that wasn't given opportunities to younger players. The whole organization was less developed as it is right now.
Well, I think the big thing, and I said this a few weeks ago, is I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that Gary Smith wouldn't play younger players. I think that he expected a certain level of play, and if that happened to come from a younger player, they would play, like an Alistair Johnson, like a Jack Mayer. Now, the problem is, it's that old thing when you graduate college, like they say they need more experience, but I can't get experience unless someone gives me experience. And that's the issue that I think we were seeing with this NSC team is that they weren't necessarily getting a high enough level of experience in Huntsville or in the academy to make an immediate, impact with NSC. And now maybe they're just going to take a flyer on a guy or two every once in a while and see if it works, which is something that we see happen internationally quite often. Like you'll see a team in good form maybe throw out an 18-year-old in England just to see if he works, or a team in bad form, similar way, shake it up just to see if it works. And we haven't fully seen that, but we haven't not seen that. Obviously, Isaiah Jones has gotten a couple of looks. Forster Jago, which is not a typical youth player, but in this sort of specific situation, he is. So it's an interesting concept. I think that unless we start to see some, for me personally, what stands out to me is we haven't seen like there's these incredible youth teams that NSC has put together. We've seen a couple prospects. And so it's like, how are they going to carry over this, what they're saying at the top level, which is that youth will be, at the forefront, to how they're going to carry that out down through the academy, because obviously you need to raise all ships down there in order for them to be actual effective generators of talent for the first team. And I don't know that that's the case right now, but it's early days, to be fair, early days. I just think it's a good thing to wonder about.
Yeah, and the other thing about youth is that we only think about it from the prism of like, well, here you have the youth academy and you have Huntsville, right? But youth can mean Patrick Yasback, right? I mean that,
Right.
He's a younger player coming into Nashville SC, still needs development. Clearly, his talent is there. It's a bit raw, and needs a little bit adjustment, maybe, or some advice or something like that. So I mean, youth can be anything. When you look at players that Nashville SC has brought in, that U22 slot, the U22 section of the squad looks very much, thin, because other than Yearwood, who is 24 years old now, actually, but his contract was signed when he was U22. By the way, Yearwood contract ends this year, and it's not guaranteed that Nashville will get him back. But if they do get him back, he won't be in a U22 spot. And Patrick Yazback, now he's the second person to ever occupy a U22 spot for Nashville SC. So that market, for example, that's not an academy. That's not. It could be somebody from your academy if they're really good. But chances are you're going outside and getting somebody like that in. Maybe getting somebody who's played already 50, 60, 100 professional games like Yazback, who needs a little bit more development, and will be a contributor, but also is a youth player. And the good thing with those players is that there's a good chance you will get your money back, because there's a good chance you can sell them later on, whether it's internally or outside of MLS.
Yeah, and I do think it is, to go back to that youth point from the way the team's been constructed at the beginning. Youth has been in mind with building this roster. It's just there've been some bad misses of Rodrigo Pinheiro, of Miguel Nazaret. There's also been a guy who wasn't a bad miss necessarily, but got hurt a lot, and Randall Leal. Randall Leal was signed as a young player to be an immediate impact player for NSC. And for the most part, he was, until he started having injury issues. And so there have been some successes on this front. There have been some successes like Alistair, like I mentioned before, Jack Mayer. So it'll be interesting to watch. But going back to Yazbek, this is the first time that they've gone out and really signed an international youth player. It feels like in a few years. The only thing I really have a takeaway, because honestly, like, have I seen him play? No, I really haven't. But I
Yeah,
will
not many
say that
have.
after several years, you know, six years for Ian Air in Nashville now, 7, whatever it is, he has finally signed a kid from Liverpool.
Not the right one though. The other
I
Liverpool.
mean, he signed a kid from Liverpool. It may have been Liverpool, Australia, but he's got one.
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe some of the Liverpool center midfield, I don't know, gene has transferred to Australia. Maybe the next Gerrard is going to be playing at Geodis Park, or in a more specific manner. God, I couldn't think of a single Everton English center mid.
It's been a minute. It's
Has
been a
there
minute.
ever been one?
Ross Barkley was the last one.
Oh, Ross Barkley. I would love for the next Ross Barkley to play for Nashville SC. That sounds amazing.
I'd love for the current Ross Barkley to play for Nashville
I mean, yeah,
SC.
that too, sure. But I think that'd be just funny. Because Ross Barkley is Ross Barkley. But going back to Yashback, I'm with Clay. I mean, I've seen some highlights. I've seen some clips here and there. I've read. I've looked at the stats. I've done some research on him, right? But it's different than watching him week in, week out, or knowing him like some of these other like MLS players that we know and see often. For him, it seems like he's a perfect profile fit for what Nashville SC is looking for. And that to me is the most exciting part if you're a Nashville SC fan, because look, before the season even started, we were talking about the midfield and how the midfield needed more attention. We saw the Drew Yearwood signing. I'm a fan of the Drew Yearwood signing. I'm a fan of Drew Yearwood. I think he's a good player. I did from the beginning of the season said they need more help. Drew Yearwood is not enough to make this midfield work. And then you consider injuries, you consider international duty. You're really, really Nashville SC was really missing a piece there in midfield. And even right now, I think they can do with another midfielder. Now that midfielder could come from the academy, could come from Huntsville, right? It doesn't have to be a signing, but I think they need another first team midfielder or somewhat of a regular. Now going back to Yesback, he does play in that defensive midfield or central midfield level, whatever you want to call it. He has played professionally in Australia, his home country, as well as Norway. He transferred he's played for two different teams in Australia, then transferred to Viking in Norway, and that's kind of where he's been getting better and better. He's earned one international cap with Australia, but has played a lot of youth games with Australia in all sorts of different levels. So still a pretty young guy, still able to kind of provide, and I think for him it's gonna be more about adapting to America as much as adapting on the pitch. Honestly, MLS is different than both of those leagues, and living in America is different than living in both those countries. So I think there's an adaptation period, but I think the Leagues Cup is also somewhat perfect opportunity for him to adapt in.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot to be said for learning what his position actually will be in MLS. Because a lot of these guys come to the league playing a different position and then find out that it doesn't quite work for a variety of reasons, their spot in the current roster that they're in, or the way that they play in MLS, whether it's physicality or pace or whatever it may be. We saw that with Ahani Mukhtar, who played more centrally as a midfielder, comes to MLS, plays as a forward. We've seen that a little bit with Leal in the past. The interesting thing to me is if Yazbek were to get out there and play, I think we're going to fully see a 3 or 4 month tryout for Nashville SC's midfield next season.
Yeah.
Because you've got Godoy, who's hopefully coming back soon. You've got Yearwood, of course, who may not be back next year. You've got Sean Davis, who I think it's an open question on whether or not he's going to be back next year. And then you've got Yazbek, who's pretty much locked in as a youth player that he'll probably be back next year. And so you've got 4 guys out there. You want to have some locked on starters from that group because it's a good amount of money committed to midfield players. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see if that competition finally, gets a good working operative midfield for Nashville.
Yeah, and another guy you didn't mention is Tal Brian Anunga, of course, because he's
Of
still
course.
on the
Yeah, yeah.
books, right? But
Yeah.
then I think an interesting one that maybe you're not thinking about him as a midfielder, but Randall Leal is about to come back to Nashville SC. And BJ Callaghan has played with 3 center midfielders often. Now, what I would say is that I don't know if this is a change that will happen right away. Maybe this is something that he waits to get a couple more players in before he makes that change. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if BJ Callaghan employs Leal as a central midfielder of some sort, right? I'm not saying he'll be
It's what
holding
we've been
midfielder,
begging for on this show for like
right?
2 years.
Right. But I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't rule that out because getting minutes on either flank or in Hani Mukhtar's position is just not going to be there for him. I don't think for Real, and also all these injuries have slowed him down. He's not the fastest guy out there by any means. He is very, very quick though, if that makes sense. He's quick with his feet, and I think that's something that that BJ Callaghan can use in midfield, especially when he's kind of building out his identity. Now, we'll see. I don't know. I'm just speculating on this one, but Nashville SC should have Leal back and should have Godoy back pretty much at the beginning of this League Cup.
And I think Godoy obviously has more size to him. I don't think that Leal's lack of size is really a hindrance in midfield, as we saw Dax McCarty be pretty effective as a smaller guy in midfield for it feels like a million games in MLS. But I will say with Leal, the other thing I just feel like I have to mention it. The other thing he brings is he brings goal scoring from deep. And that is the thing that I think I've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it on this show. But that is something that I really, really want to see. That's something I'd like to see from Yazbek. Like, try and open it up a little bit to create more space for your forwards, to create more space, to be honest with Hani Mukhtar, because one of the reasons Hani Mukhtar is not effective is because everyone knows that he's the only guy right now, and Surridge to a lesser extent, but everyone knows that he's the only guy who's going to be scoring outside of 8 yards.
Yeah, and I think the last point I'll say on maybe players who haven't gone as much time, whether it's for injuries or form or whatever it may be, is that this is their chance. This right here. Randall Leal, there's a good chance if Gary Smith was still coaching Nashville SC, he wouldn't have gotten this chance because Gary Smith already knows what he can get out of Randall Leal, right? It's already been decided. To where now with BJ Callaghan, there's a little bit of, well, it's a new way of looking at things. There's different positions, different stuff. So I think for Leal, he's looking at maybe proving himself again, which I know could be hard for players, but not just him, right? You look at maybe somebody like Josh Bauer, maybe someone like Brian Anunga. If you play two shuttlers or two eights in front of Brian Anunga and tell him, hey, just do the defensive part, all of a sudden he's a much better player, right? When he doesn't. So I mean, and I don't mean that in any disrespect, but it's just kind of what he's. If you focus on his strength and he doesn't need to do the rest of the stuff, he all of a sudden now has a new thing that he can do. Again, these are, I think, the possibilities with BJ Callaghan keep all the players open, which is a really good thing for the players looking from the outside in. Obviously, the players already in the lineup are going to have to prove themselves as well because there are limited spots. So I think the best thing is that for Nashville SC, all of these players will want to prove themselves and want to get on that starting lineup, which means for the first time in a very long time, there might be competition for these different positions that we just haven't seen happen for Nashville SC, really. There was always the starters, like Clay was saying. Mukhtar is always going to start no matter what. And then there were always the second tier players. And maybe for once, we're going to see a little bit of competition, at least for this first period.
Yeah, it's for once some exciting times with Nashville SC coming up this week. Let's see how long we can stay excited. That'll be the big question. but for now, we're going to move on to our third segment, and we will be back in just a moment. You're listening to Pharma Soccer. And welcome back to Pharmaceutical Soccer. Clay Traden with Belair Shabilla, and we've got some light housekeeping as in regards to international teams to go over. The Olympics are underway, as we talked about, and an okay start for the U.S. team. Obviously, they lost the first game, but Walker Zimmerman getting on the score sheet in a very exciting, it's very exciting, hour and a half or so for the U.S. men.
He scored a worldie, man. I mean, it was a goal that will be remembered for ages. No, you got to be there. We got to be at the right place, right time, and that's what he did. The U.S. lost to France. Did it end up being 3-0? Was that?
I think so, yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, and then they ended up beating New Zealand 4-1. So really good response from the U.S. And like Clay said, not too bad from the men's team. They have one more game going on in the group stages. Is it Guinea? Did I get that right? I'm mixing the men's and the women's. I can't figure it out
it's
now.
against Guinea.
Guinea, right. Who France struggled with a little bit. But if we're going back to the U.S., I don't think they played that bad against France. They hit the post or the bar twice in that game. I watched most of that game, if not all of it. I thought they looked pretty good, honestly, just by the result. Now, switching gears to the women's, who've been absolutely flying. Oh,
quick, just to reminder, because I'm honestly surprised. I was talking about this with a buddy of mine the other day. I'm surprised how many people don't fully realize it. Now, I understand that most people listening to this show probably do know for the men's team, it is a youth team. It's Walker Zimmerman plus a youth team, essentially. So it's an under 23 team for the men. Now, for the women's team, it is a full, international women's side, full senior international women's side, and therefore it is a much more important tournament on the women's side of the Olympics as opposed to the men's side of the Olympics. And
Right.
so that gets lost in the fold a little bit by people that it catches you off guard, don't know that. So I just want to reinforce that here. But yes, the women are ripping and roaring to start the Olympics.
Yeah, for the men's, they get three over 23 players. Walker Zimmerman, Miles Robinson, and Georgi Mihalovic are the three chosen by the U.S. Georgi Mihalovic and Miles Robinson are both younger than Walker. Like Walker Zimmerman is pretty much the only veteran, if you would, of that team, where even the other two overage players are still fairly young players when we look at things, all things considered. Yeah, for the women's, they already got 2 wins in 2 games, guaranteed their spot in the next round. The tournament is a bit different for the women's because there's only 3 groups, so best third place teams end up going through. I don't know how much time you want to spend on this, Clay, but there was a lot of controversy on the Canadian side of things. Clay, I don't know. Yeah, what happened, I guess.
So, uh, first off, just a quick shout out: the U.S. women will be playing in Nashville later this
Oh yeah.
year in October. So, hopefully, that'll be celebrating a gold medal. We shall see. But the spying and the spying with Canada is interesting, right? Because there have been a number of spying controversies in sports over the years. Apparently, the Canadians were using a drone to watch other teams' practices. Now, what I will say is that I feel like this is the least important sport to have something like that. Uh, Marcelo Bielsa very famously got caught
Yeah.
spying on teams when he was the manager of Leeds. And then you have other coaches come out like Sartini with Vancouver and said, I don't really care. The other team can watch our training session. It doesn't really matter. All the training sessions are open anyway. And so I find it kind of interesting. I also find the level of offense taken on this whole controversy to be quite strange. There have been FIFA sanctions leveled against the Canadian Federation, against the coaching. Again, there have been actual charges brought about from the French government. There's all this stuff going on. It's like, is this the first time FIFA has really like brought the hammer down on somebody and it's Canada for a kind of meaningless spying setup? Like it just seems crazy to me.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I get where people are coming from, I think, in terms of, being offended that this is the beautiful game that Canada has ruined by using drones or whatever. But I guess I don't know. I prefer they didn't do that. That's where I stand on. But I also agree with you that I don't know how much of an advantage that was compared to, somebody who used performance enhancing drugs or something like that, right? When
Yeah,
you put
there
it, it's
have
not even the
been.
same.
I mean, it's really like they need to be punished. It is against the rules. You should be punished if it's against the rules, and people should be punished, and there should be penalties for it. And they got a pretty big penalty, 6 point deduction. But the thing for me that makes me laugh about it more than anything else is like this is what we're punishing. How many abuse cases have happened in international soccer? Like there's dozens of them every single year. And no, it's not FIFA's, they're not going to punish that. But hey, there's this drone that comes
Yeah.
over, bring the hammer down. Like, we cannot have this.
I
So
think it's
it
important
is
to
what it
note
is.
also that reports came out that both the men's and the women's team used
Yes.
it. So that's kind of
It's
related to
systemic.
Nashville
Yeah.
SC, because the usage of these drones goes all the way back to 2021, including the 2024 Copa America, which Jacob Schaffelberg was, one of the stars in it, really. So just something to keep in mind. Keep an eye out on it. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Just a wild little Olympic story. Always good to
Yeah,
have one of
it,
those.
it's a weird story, and um, some of the players have come out and said that they have not received information. So somebody is telling tales, but we'll see. But either way, I don't expect there to be any lasting. It's yeah, it's just some weird stuff. We can move on to more important things, and by more important things, we of course mean the League's Cup, the most important trophy in American sports.
Yes. No. That would be the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup.
Oh,
Um,
hey, I'm here for that too. Don't.
yeah. Or the Mid-State Nashville, Tennessee
The I
Tuesday.
65 Cup. NSC still holds the I 65 Cup.
There you go. Never giving that away ever
Yeah.
again. No, the Leagues Cup is coming up, and we talked about it a little bit in the first segment, but I think it's important to kind of give people a perspective of what to come. It's fairly similar to what happened last year. Couple differences you'll notice is that the top four Mexican teams have hubs, which means they will be hosting games in those hubs. Now, all the games are hosted in Canada and the US, regardless. However, the top four Mexican teams will not travel as much. So when Nashville played Monterrey in the semifinal, they were pretty beat. That's probably not going to happen this time around because the top four, including Monterrey, will not travel as much. That said, three of those top four teams are in the West, so Nashville SC wouldn't have to worry about them until the final or third place game. One still in the East, which is Tigres. The other thing to keep an eye out on is that Nashville SC will host less games altogether, just in terms of mathematically. Nashville SC finished 2022 in a better position than 2023. And that meant that they are able to host more teams because it's based on your MLS standing. So combined between the MLS standing and the four Mexican teams having hubs, Nashville SC will just have to host less teams. That said, I was looking around a little bit this morning, and I think I am 100% sure, actually, that it is much better for Nashville SC to finish second than first in this group. And I am convinced by that. Finishing first means you go into the same bracket as Tigres, who do have a hub in the East. You go into the same bracket as Inter Miami, who won the whole thing last year. And you go into the same bracket as Columbus Crew, who are the reigning MLS champions.
And
If you
now,
finish
right now,
second,
probably the best team, especially if there's an extensive injury to Messi.
right, right. And they are the best team, I think, even when Inter Miami have Messi. And I mean that. The thing is they also make the CONCACAF Champions League final and all sorts of stuff. If you finish second, if Nashville SC finishes second, they go into a bracket that doesn't have those three, meaning they will have more opportunities to host games and they will have lesser opponents until the semifinal. That's when you would meet one of those three. Now, obviously, this has taken a lot of liberty about Nashville SC making it far and these teams making it far, but we're just guessing, right? I mean, only a few games have been played so far. There are 15 groups. There's a lot of moving parts, but just in terms of taking your odds and taking your chances, I think to me, when I look at this, it makes a lot more sense, or it makes it a lot easier for Nashville SC to finish second. It is important to say that the first game of Nashville SC's group has happened, and New England Revolution beat Mazatlan 1-0. Mazatlan, we'll go into it. Actually, I'll give you a preview of Mazatlan a little bit later, but that means that Nashville SC pretty much just needs maybe 2 points. Again, no draws. If the game ends in a draw, it goes to penalties. The team who wins the penalties gets 2 points. Team who loses the penalty gets 1 point. Wins 3 points.
Fun times. Good times, great oldies.
Yeah.
It's about Mazatlan.
You want me to tell you about Mazatlan?
Yeah.
They
All I know
are
is that Ake Lobo used to play there and that they wear purple.
they sure they were wearing orange against New England, and I was very shocked. I was like, what is happening? Mazatlan is the equivalent of, I don't know, like Austin, if they never, no, Austin's too good for them. I don't know. They're very bad. They got
Yes.
into the league in 2020, and their best finish since getting into the league has been in 10th position which got them a spot in the play-in round, and they lost in the first round of the play-in round. They entered the Liga MX the same time as Nashville SC entered MLS, and they've had 7 coaches in that time. So just to give you perspective on who Mazatlan are, they've played 4 games so far into the season in Liga MX. They've lost 3, drawn 1, never scored away from home. They are bad team. They are a bad team, and they've been a bad team. And they probably going to continue being a bad team. They kind of surprised people a little bit because they ended up drawing both of their matches last year in the Leagues Cup, and making it to the round of 32. Kind of made it out of the group surprisingly, but even with that, they're not a very good team. The other team obviously is New England Revolution, who are also a bad team. So
Yeah, they were a bad team except for like the 3 weeks when they played Nashville and after.
right,
But other
the,
than
the
that,
catalyst of beating Nashville got them going. But New England still Nashville will have to travel to New England, so that's a little bit harder to where Mazatlan they do host them. So I think there's something to be said there. And again, I don't think finishing second is the end of the world for Nashville SC. Matter of fact, I think if I was Nashville SC, I would take second over first.
yeah, and we're gonna get to a plugs and predictions on what to expect out of this game. But before we do that, one more piece of news, some fun news here. Nashville announced over the weekend that they will be playing one more friendly this year. That is, if you don't count the Leagues Cup as a friendly tournament, which it kind of is. But that friendly will be against Huntsville City FC, their feeder club in Huntsville, which is pretty exciting news, I think. You've been to Huntsville, right, Blair?
No, not yet, actually.
Okay, well, it's a really fun venue. It's really cool. I am very excited that the folks in Huntsville, a lot of whom support NSC, but may have not even thought about going to an NSC match. It's more of a family vibe down there than the supporters vibe that you would get at NSC. We'll get a chance to see, a top flight team play in Huntsville, which is pretty cool, especially at that point in the season.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a pretty nice venue. They've renovated it and it looks pretty nice from what I can tell. I do want to go. I keep saying I'm gonna go and I never end up going. But yeah, I think it makes sense for Nashville to play this. I'm a little confused about the timing of it. But there is an international break where Nashville SC doesn't have any games, and that's why they are there.
Yeah, I would be surprised to see any true big names play in there, but I'm sure they're going to try and include someone like Hani Mukhtar at least for a brief cameo, so the folks in Huntsville get to see, the former MVP and the guy who just signed an extension with Nashville. So a guy that they've got locked up and is the true star of the team.
And I mean, another game for BJ Callaghan to manage this team is can't hurt at this point. They have 9 games going into after the Leagues Cup in MLS. 5 of those games are teams around Nashville SC. So having another game where you can implement maybe some ideas where you pretty much manage both teams in a way, it's not going
Yeah.
to be a bad thing.
The more fun thing there will seeing the Huntsville guys against the best competition they'll play this year.
Yep.
And I think that is, to me, that is the number one reason you want to see this team play in this tournament, or not in this tournament, in this friendly, is because how many stories, Valera and I have been watching soccer for years and years and years. How many stories have we heard where it's a guy gets his like next big step because he played well in one game?
Yeah.
Like for Seamus Coleman, obviously I'm an Everton fan. Seamus Coleman was playing, Sunday League amateur, and they played Sligo, and the same thing happened with Sligo and Everton. So in a couple of years, he went from basically being an amateur player to playing in the Premier League because he had 2 really good games at really important times. In the U.S. national team, Jay Demerit did the same thing. He ended up taking Watford to the Premier League because he had a good game against Watford in a friendly at some point, earlier in his career. So, like, obviously, it's a little bit different as this is a feeder club and that Nashville's going to know more about these players, but there might be a guy that's on the cusp, maybe of not making the team the next year, but plays against an MLS side and has the type of game and shows the type of talent they can get out of a game like that. And that can be, putting a jetpack onto the rest of their career. And so it's a really exciting opportunity for the players in Huntsville, even if they don't end up finishing their career in Nashville or continuing their career in Huntsville or Nashville. It's a really cool opportunity for those kids down there. So I'm really excited about that for them.
Yep. Yep.
All right. Well, we will get to the plugs and predictions now. Obviously, the big one is Wednesday against Mazatlan. Chances are that you're listening to this on the way to the stadium on Wednesday night. So Valair right now is going to tell you exactly what's going to happen, and then if it doesn't happen, it's because Steven's not here, and he rubbed off on us, and we were not reasonable enough.
Yes, sure. I think first of all, please follow me at Valer Shabilla on all social media. Not all, but most social media, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, all that stuff. And then go to YouTube and subscribe to Valer Shabilla. If you don't know how to spell it, do your best or look at your notes or something. I'm sure I'll pop up. Bald guy, beard, all that stuff. Once you follow me on all social media and share my stuff, you will go to the Nashville SC game at Joris Park, and you will see Nashville SC win 2-0. And it's going to be a 2-0 win where a goal will be scored by Hani Mukhtar from a penalty, maybe 20 minutes in, and then another goal will be scored pretty late on by one of the substitutes. I don't know who. I'm going to go ahead and say Patrick Yasback.
Debut goal. There's
Yeah,
strong history of that with NSC.
I'm just going for it, but might as well. And then yeah, that's my prediction. We'll talk to you before the New England game, so we'll give you that prediction later.
And then for me, check me out at Clay La Soul on Twitter and Instagram. You should also check out while you're at it the Nashville Soccer Archive, doing some good work there. If you have things you'd like to donate to the archive, the physical archive, we are at Vanderbilt University. Reach out to me and I will find a way to get that stuff into the archive. I just got some cool stuff the other day, looking to add some more. Now, as for what you can see, and also, I don't want to leave it out, you should go check out Kicking It 615 and give them, after you give, your money to us and you give your money to Wes, you should give your money to Kicking It 615 and help youth soccer grow in Nashville. It's free soccer for children, and they're near and dear to Valair's heart as he is the one who started it. So
we do need volunteers almost as much as money, if not more right now. So
even better,
please.
Volunteer at Kicking It 615. You can influence America's youth. Be a coach with Kicking It 615.
In a good way. In a very good way.
I don't know why it would be anything other than a good way if you're listening to this show. Obviously, everyone who listens to Pharmaceutical Soccer is a great human being, Valair, unless you're trying to say that they're not.
I can't control who hits play.
I don't know. Moving on. NSC will play Mazatlan on Wednesday, and while you're there, you're going to see NSC give up an early goal and make us all sad. And then they will come back and win 3-1. Goals from Hani Mukhtar, Sam Surge, and Forster Ajago in front of a very interesting crowd number. I'm very excited to see how many people are at the stadium. It's an 8 p.m. start on a Wednesday night. It is the first game for BJ Callaghan, so that part is interesting. But it's a Leagues Cup game on a Wednesday night, and I do not have high expectations.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see on that one.
I would put an over under here on the number of people in the stands, but I feel like it's not going to make that number in the stands won't be the number they show on the board in the 85th minute. So we'll see on that front. Either way, we'll be back next week to talk Nashville SC against Mazatlan and hopefully more games in the Leagues Cup going forward. You've been listening to Pharma Soccer. Thanks, everyone.